So, Stu, it's been, I think, around about 7 years since Rick and Michelle knocked on our door and you went out and visited the site for the first time. And looking at some of the photos, I wasn't at that site visit, but looking back now, it really feels like this was just such a quintessentially Brisbane type of a project. You know,
Yeah,
the rolling hills, the kind of pretty pristine condition of the cottage, and the big mango tree, I think it is, in the backyard. It's kind of
yeah,
peak Brisbane, isn't it?
yeah. I think so. And I mean, you can see the frangipani trees in bloom. And sorry, they're actually called jacaranda trees. But what would I know? But not only did it turn out to be the kind of quintessential Brisbane house, but also Rick and Michelle just had fallen in love with this building. These guys had actually come up from Melbourne and had been living in Brisbane for some time, and had just sort of created this love affair with the kind of local building type. But I think like a lot of our projects, Aaron, I think we just took this commission on board and started the project like we would any project, right? We just started a kind of conversation with a client about not just the house and the sort of shared admiration that we might have had for this building, but also kind of the kind of inherent value of this land that the house was sitting on, and the kind of spaciousness and the kind of low density of this kind of neighbourhood, and the condition of this terrain. But I don't think at any point, like many of these projects, did we sort of start out thinking that this little project would be, going to be kind of such an important project for us.
An award-winning project.
An award-winning project. I don't think we have that in our minds at the beginning, right? Like I think each of the buildings that we take on are somehow going to be special to us. I think that's just always been the way that we've applied ourselves.
It certainly felt, and some of these images are showing the inspiration for the building, which came out of kind of a sustained period of working with Queenslanders, and in particular in this house, an observation of the battened-in back stair, or the defended stair, that you see all around the Brizzy suburbs, letting you get out the back door and down under the house to the laundry or to the storage in this defended space. And this kind of amazing spatial condition that you get of this sort of styrated light coming through the battens and being cast along the walls. It's a pretty amazing condition. And
I mean, in that shot there, you can just you can imagine, in the context of a subtropical summer, the kind of scorching heat of the sun, and these batten walls are fantastic at just taking the edge off that sharp sun, right? And somehow anyone who's grown up in Queensland, and in particular had some experience or encounter with these buildings, will kind of recall sitting on these back steps, overlooking the garden and having morning tea or afternoon cup of tea. I remember visiting a friend when I was younger, and his dad used to sit at the top step of these stairs and crack a tall bottle of beer, or a couple of them, as the sun went down. I mean, we talk about a kind of the value of the phrase timber and tin in Brisbane, and the value of these cottages as cultural artefact. But I think it was lovely the way that you articulated, Aaron, the kind of elements of the particular elements of the Queenslander or the cottage that we admired, and broke them down into kind of 5 elements. Sometimes elements that one doesn't necessarily think about in relation to these buildings, like the ground or the garden. And we'd always talked about, unfortunately, one of the very first things that gets removed from these buildings in any backyard extension is these beautiful battened-in stairs. So it was kind of interesting when we started this project and we were trying to discover what the project wanted to be. Somehow we kind of, we had to kind of find a solution for how we would deal with this 2-story element that was being extended to the back of this beautiful 30 cottage. And I thought, wouldn't it be delightful if you actually had to walk outside to get to the room at the top? There really wasn't a lot of room in this plan, or in the budget to be building lots of internal circulation, I recall. And, we were really, I think, ambitious about making a relatively modest and humble building. And so we thought, well, boy, we started laying out this external stair and draping this beautiful battened veil over the facade. In a way, it almost felt like that had become the project. Like everything that sat behind it was just the kind of stuff that you need to kind of exist day to day in a kind of domestic setting. But it felt as a sort of piece of architecture, the kind of fundamental move was in the kind of 1 meter deep miniature kind of building, or this habitable facade that we were making.
It's interesting to kind of reflect on how heavily embedded it is in the sort of building and spatial tradition of Brisbane, and to then receive an award like House of the Year, which was, I have to say, pretty unexpected. I don't know how you felt about it, but personally I felt like this was such a Brisbane project. It kind of, well, obviously we entered it because we thought it was likely to get something, but I certainly never expected that we might kind of take home the top gong.
Yeah, for sure.
It's kind of interesting to think about how that might translate to places other than Brisbane, because so much of that kind of tacit understanding of what the space means or what kind of behaviour it might enable seems so intrinsically linked to childhood experiences of, having sticky orange juice running down your forearms while you sit on the back steps and, watch the sun go down or Krakatoa or whatever it might be. And yet this was something that resonated, and I wonder if it's maybe something that exists in other cities and we're just not quite so aware of it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it, that I think it's the kind of project that starts tapping into broader values, cultural values, and it's something that we've been chipping away at in the backyard of Brisbane houses for many years now. But this latent value of private open space, I guess, in a historic low density city, it's kind of really easy to overlook the value of that, the value of that asset in a city like Brisbane, and just see all of that open space in the backyard as a perfect building site. But I think it's a combination of things. It's a client like Rick and Michelle coming to us and saying, well, we admire this building, and so therefore there's a kind of basic premise that we would do as little as we needed to kind of just adjust the house to suit their
because we hardly touch the existing cottage, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The kind of the piece out the back with the battened veil is really the only significant kind of change to its material form. Everything else was kind of performed and solved within the original footprint. So you get this kind of a mandate from our client who's saying, well, look, we admire the building and we don't necessarily want you to kind of do too much with this. So as a kind of the premise and the starting point is about doing as little as we need to, So it's great when you have a client who says, make this as small as possible, but let's make a building. Let's create a building that is about family and about occupation and about pleasure, about rooms that work, rooms that offer beautiful amenity, and so we're combining that with our own kind of latent kind of interest in the productive potential and the kind of public asset, collective asset in open space, and making sure that we're not kind of building over all of the backyard. I really loved how kind of at the end we kind of stood up on the hill and we looked across the valley. It's almost like a return to those very first photos that we took and that we kind of showed at the start of this slideshow. But somehow that double-story extension just finds its own little piece on the side of the hill, and I think the form is really significant. Not only is it a kind of really striking, simple architectural form, but I think it hollowed out the mass at the center, and I think it kind of allows one to kind of look obliquely across the valley, across the site. And somehow I find that to be quite generous about the building.
I think what I've always really loved about this project, and it's kind of a good sign that you've done well in a project, is when you come to it at the end, and it's sort of hard to imagine doing anything else now. And normally when we get to the end of a project and if it hasn't kind of come out of the box perfectly, you're sort of left thinking, if only you could keep tweaking, if you could sort of move this or fix that. But it sort of feels like the outcome that always existed on the site. In a way, it was just a matter of going ahead and building it. And it's so simple. It's actually rather quiet, given how kind of iconically graphic it can appear in some of the photos.
Yeah.
But it just feels like it was always meant to be there.
Yeah, and I think it's sitting quite prominently on this corner site, and yet one could easily drive past this house, down either of the streets, and not even notice that the architect had stopped by to do a significant renovation. Like it's really subtle in that way, and in that way, I think we've been successful in discovering what we always talked about or referred to as an appropriate backyard language. That this we've been able to kind of come onto this site, engage with the building, intervene with this building in a subtle way, even get car accommodation cunningly underneath this building, all without having to raise the building or excavate the site. I'm really pleased about that. That it's not. In a way, it fulfills its duty in that one might always need to kind of consider what would it be like if everyone in the street built this way. What kind of street would we end up with, or what kind of neighbourhood would we create?
It's not the building that I expected to win Australian House of the Year with, that's for sure, but I'm really delighted that it was.
Absolutely, yeah. How fantastic was that this small kind of modest little building in the backyard of somewhere in Brisbane might win such an award. Fantastic.